In the year 1632, in the bustling city of York, England, a child was born who would one day become a legend. This boy, named Robinson Crusoe, entered a world on the cusp of great change and adventure. The cobblestone streets of York echoed with the footsteps of young Robinson as he grew, his eyes wide with wonder at the tales of far-off lands. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the musty odor of old books in his father's study, where maps of distant shores adorned the walls. These maps whispered promises of adventure, their faded lines tracing paths across oceans Robinson could only imagine. As he matured, a storm brewed within Robinson's heart, mirroring the tempests that raged in the seas he longed to sail. On one side stood the safe harbor of his father's wishes, a respectable career in law, as solid and unyielding as the stone walls of York. On the other, the siren call of adventure, as wild and unpredictable as the waves that crashed against distant shores. "The sea is a fickle mistress, my boy," his father would say, his voice low and gravelly like stones rolling in the tide. The firelight danced in his eyes, casting shadows that seemed to speak of hidden dangers. "She gives with one hand and takes with the other. Best to keep your feet on solid ground." But for Robinson, the ground beneath his feet felt like shifting sand. Each cautionary tale from his parents only fanned the flames of his desire. Their words of warning were like wind to embers, igniting his passion rather than extinguishing it. The loss of his older brother to military service cast a pall over the Crusoe household. It was as if a cold fog had settled over their home, chilling the air with unspoken fears. His parents' anxiety was a tangible thing, wrapping around Robinson like clinging vines, threatening to root him in place. Yet, the more they sought to anchor him, the stronger the current of his dreams pulled. Robinson found himself drawn to the edge of town, where the horizon stretched endlessly. There, he'd watch ships disappear into the distance, their sails billowing like the wings of great birds taking flight. The salty tang of sea air filled his nostrils, a taste of the freedom he craved. As his 19th birthday approached, the tension within Robinson reached a fever pitch. York, once a cocoon of comfort, now felt like a cage. The familiar streets seemed to close in, the walls of buildings looming ever closer, suffocating his spirit. Then, on a crisp September morning in 1651, something inside Robinson snapped. The air was sharp with the promise of autumn, carrying the scent of change. Without a word to his parents, without a backwards glance at the life he was leaving behind, he found himself drawn to the bustling port of Hull. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat a war drum urging him forward. The cacophony of the harbor creaking wood, flapping canvas, shouted orders, was a siren song to his ears. And there, bobbing gently in the water, was a ship bound for London. To Robinson, it wasn't just a vessel, it was salvation, a key to unlock the shackles of expectation that had bound him for so long. With trembling hands and a mouth dry as sand, he approached the captain. Words tumbled from his lips, coins changed hands, and in a dizzying moment, Robinson Crusoe found himself aboard the ship. As it pulled away from the dock, he watched the only home he'd ever known shrink into the distance, his past receding with each swell of the waves. The coastline of Hull faded to a thin line on the horizon, then vanished altogether. Robinson stood on the deck, the salty wind whipping through his hair, his heart a maelstrom of exhilaration and terror. He had taken his first step into the unknown, setting in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of his life forever. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Robinson felt a shiver of anticipation run down his spine. The gentle rocking of the ship lulled him into a sense of security, but as darkness fell, an ominous cloud bank loomed on the horizon. The seasoned sailors exchanged worried glances, their hushed whispers carried away by the strengthening wind. Robinson's excitement began to curdle into unease as he realized his adventure might be taking a dangerous turn sooner than he had ever imagined. Crusoe's first voyage began with a surge of excitement and anticipation. However, the thrill quickly turned to dread as the ship encountered a violent storm near Yarmouth. The sky darkened to an inky black, blotting out the sun like a thick, suffocating blanket. Wind howled through the rigging, a banshee's wail that chilled Crusoe to his very bones. Massive waves, tall as houses and just as solid, crashed against the ship's hull. Each impact sent shudders through the wooden frame, the vessel groaning in protest like a wounded animal. Crusoe's stomach lurched with each pitch and roll, his body a mirror of the tumultuous sea. The acrid taste of fear rose in his throat, mingling with the salt spray that coated his lips. For days, the tempest raged unabated, a relentless assault on both ship and spirit. Even the most weathered sailors wore grim expressions, their faces etched with worry lines deeper than any sea trench. Crusoe watched them scurry about the deck, their movements frantic yet purposeful. Ropes were secured, hatches battened down, each action a desperate attempt to keep the hungry sea at bay. As the situation grew increasingly dire, Crusoe felt mortality's cold fingers brush against his soul. For the first time in his young life, he truly understood how fragile human existence could be. In the damp darkness of the ship's hold, he clasped his hands together, fingers interlocking so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Please, Lord," he whispered, his words barely audible above the storm's fury, "spare us from this watery grave." The ship's timbers strained against the relentless assault, creaking and groaning like an old man's joints. Suddenly, a sickening crack split the air. The mast, once proud and tall, splintered and toppled onto the deck in a tangle of ropes and canvas. Water poured in through newly formed breaches, and panic spread among passengers and crew like wildfire in a drought-stricken forest. Just when all seemed lost, when Crusoe could taste the bitter dregs of defeat, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. A nearby boat, braving the treacherous conditions, came to their rescue. Crusoe and the crew, soaked to the bone and trembling with exhaustion and relief, were plucked from the jaws of death and brought safely to shore. As Crusoe's feet touched solid ground in Yarmouth, a strange cocktail of emotions washed over him. Relief at having survived war with a lingering sense of excitement and adventure. His clothes hung in tatters, his body battered and bruised, but his spirit remained unbroken, a flame that refused to be extinguished. It was then that Crusoe faced a moment of reckoning. The father of his shipmate, who was also the captain of their ill-fated vessel, approached him. The older man's weathered face was a map of concern, each line telling a story of storms weathered and perils faced. "Young man," he said, placing a calloused hand on Crusoe's shoulder, his voice gruff but tinged with genuine worry, "take this as a sign. Return home to your family. The sea is no place for those unprepared for its cruelties." Crusoe listened, his mind racing like the wind-whipped waves. The captain's words echoed those of his own father, warnings he had so casually dismissed before embarking on this journey. For a brief moment, he considered heeding this advice. The memory of the storm's fury was still fresh, the fear still a tangible thing that clung to him like his salt-stiffened clothes. But as he stood there, the salt air filling his lungs and the distant crash of waves in his ears, Crusoe felt something stir within him. The near-death experience, rather than dampening his spirit, had only fanned the flames of his adventurous nature. It was as if the storm had washed away his doubts, leaving behind a bedrock of determination. He thanked the captain for his concern, genuine gratitude in his voice. But in his heart, Crusoe knew he could not turn back now. The call of the unknown was too strong, a siren song he could not resist. The lure of adventure tugged at him, as powerful and inexorable as the tide. In the following days, as he recovered from his ordeal, Crusoe's mind was filled with visions of distant shores and untold wonders. The dangers he had faced seemed to pale in comparison to the potential rewards that awaited him. Each bruise on his body was a badge of honor, each ache a reminder of his resilience. And so, with a heart full of hope and a head full of dreams, Crusoe soon found himself embarking on another voyage. This time, his destination was Guinea on the African coast, a land of mystery and promise. As he set sail from London, leaving behind the safety of familiar shores once more, Crusoe felt a thrill of excitement course through his veins. The ship cut through the waves, each nautical mile taking him further from home and closer to his destiny. Crusoe stood at the rail, the wind tousling his hair, a smile playing on his lips. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them head-on, his spirit unquenched and his resolve stronger than ever. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Crusoe's eyes were drawn to a dark shape on the horizon. At first, he thought it might be a cloud, but as it drew nearer, his blood ran cold. The unmistakable silhouette of a ship came into view, but not just any ship. The black flag fluttering atop its mast told a chilling tale. Pirates! Crusoe's heart pounded in his chest, threatening to burst through his ribs. His eyes widened as he watched the pirate ship draw near, its black flag a sinister promise of the violence to come. Crusoe's heart pounded in his chest, threatening to burst through his ribs. His eyes widened as he watched the pirate ship draw near, its black flag a sinister promise of the violence to come. The air grew thick with tension, the salty breeze carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder and fear. Crusoe's palms grew slick with sweat as he gripped the ship's railing, his knuckles turning white. The clash of steel rang out, a cacophony of terror punctuated by the anguished cries of men. Pirates swarmed onto their vessel like locusts, their faces twisted with bloodlust. Crusoe's world narrowed to a series of brutal, chaotic moments. The tang of blood filled his nostrils. His muscles screamed as he fought, but it was futile. Their attackers moved with the practiced efficiency of seasoned killers. In a dizzying instant, cold iron bit into Crusoe's wrists. The shackles chafed his skin raw, a constant reminder of his newfound captivity. He stumbled forward, pushed roughly by calloused hands. The Moorish captain loomed before him, dark eyes glittering with triumph. Crusoe's stomach churned with a nauseating mix of fear and despair. The sun beat down mercilessly as Crusoe toiled in the fields and ports of Sallee. 2 years stretched into an eternity of back-breaking labor and meager rations. The taste of freedom faded like a half-remembered dream, replaced by the bitter tang of sweat and desperation. Yet, even in his darkest moments, a tiny ember of hope refused to be extinguished. Crusoe's mind never stopped working, constantly seeking a way out. Each night, as he lay on his thin, lumpy pallet, he closed his eyes and imagined the feel of a ship's deck beneath his feet, the wind in his hair, sailing towards liberty. Then, like a crack of lightning illuminating a stormy sky, his chance arrived. His master, grown complacent, sent Crusoe on a fishing expedition with 2 other slaves. As they pushed off from shore, Crusoe's heart raced with a potent mixture of fear and anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, praying for, dreaming of. Among his fellow slaves was a young boy named Xury. Crusoe saw a kindred spirit in the lad's intelligent eyes, a spark of courage that mirrored his own desperate desire for freedom. As they sailed further from the coast, Crusoe leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want to be free?" The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Xury's eyes widened, a kaleidoscope of emotions flashing across his face: fear, hope, determination. With a slight nod, he sealed their pact. Together, they waited, muscles tense, nerves on edge, for the perfect moment to strike. When it came, they exploded into action. Adrenaline surged through Crusoe's veins as they fought with the desperation of men with nothing to lose. In a blur of fists and shouts, they overpowered the Moorish crew, their element of surprise proving decisive. Crusoe stood at the helm of the small boat, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the wheel. The vast expanse of the African coast stretched out before them, a daunting canvas of possibility and peril. He glanced at Xury, seeing his own mix of exhilaration and terror mirrored in the boy's eyes. Their journey down the coast was a gauntlet of dangers. The relentless sun turned the deck into a scorching plain, blistering their skin and parching their throats. Thirst clawed at them constantly, and hunger gnawed at their bellies like a ravenous beast. Each distant sail on the horizon sent a jolt of fear through them. Would this be the ship that would drag them back to the hell they had escaped? The coast itself was treacherous. Jagged rocks threatened to tear their fragile vessel apart, while unpredictable currents sought to dash them against the unforgiving shore. At night, the cries of unknown beasts echoed from the darkness, sending shivers down their spines and populating their dreams with nameless terrors. Yet, in the crucible of their shared ordeal, an unlikely bond formed between Crusoe and Xury. They shared every morsel of food and precious drop of water. They took turns at the helm, watching over each other as they snatched moments of fitful sleep. In Xury, Crusoe found not just an ally, but a friend, someone who understood the depth of his longing for freedom, who shared his fears and his hopes. As they sailed further south, their days were filled with both wonder and dread. Schools of flying fish skimmed across the waves like silver arrows, providing brief moments of beauty amidst their struggle. They watched in awe as a pod of whales breached nearby, their massive bodies crashing back into the sea with thunderous splashes that shook their tiny boat. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking array of oranges and purples, Crusoe stood at the bow of the boat. The salty breeze ruffled his hair, carrying with it the tantalizing promise of new horizons. He glanced back at Xury, who was carefully adjusting the sail, his young face etched with a determination that belied his years. In that moment, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, Crusoe felt a surge of hope so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. They were no longer slaves, but masters of their own fate, sailing towards a future full of possibilities. The taste of freedom, so long denied, was intoxicating. As night fell, bringing with it a blanket of stars, Crusoe's eyes scanned the darkening horizon. His breath caught in his throat as he spotted something, a faint glimmer of light in the distance. Was it a mirage, a cruel trick of his desperate mind? Or could it be? "Xury," he called out, his voice hoarse with excitement and fear. "Do you see that?" The boy scrambled to join him, squinting into the gathering gloom. Slowly, the pinprick of light grew larger, taking shape. It was a ship, its outline becoming clearer with each passing moment. Crusoe's heart raced. Would this vessel be their salvation or their doom? As the ship drew nearer, its intentions still unknown, Crusoe and Xury clung to each other, their fate hanging in the balance. Crusoe and Xury had made a daring escape, finding themselves adrift on the vast African coast. Their fortunes were about to change as a Portuguese ship appeared on the horizon, a beacon of hope in their desperate situation. The relentless sun beat down on their small boat, the wood creaking beneath them with each swell of the ocean. Crusoe's parched lips cracked as he squinted at the approaching vessel, hardly daring to believe their luck. Xury's grip on his arm tightened, a mixture of fear and hope etched across his young face. As the ship drew near, Crusoe could make out the weathered face of its captain, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he extended a hand to help them aboard. The rough hemp of the rope ladder bit into Crusoe's palms as he climbed, his legs trembling with exhaustion and relief. The salty breeze whipped through Crusoe's matted hair as the African shoreline receded into the distance. He leaned against the ship's railing, feeling the weight of his ordeal lifting from his shoulders. The rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers and the gentle lapping of waves against the hull lulled him into a sense of security he hadn't felt in months. Days blurred into weeks as they sailed across the Atlantic. Crusoe's skin bronzed under the relentless sun, his body growing stronger with each passing day. The captain regaled him with tales of far-off lands and bustling ports, stoking the embers of wanderlust that had always smoldered in Crusoe's heart. When they finally reached the shores of Brazil, Crusoe's legs wobbled like a newborn colt's as he stepped onto solid ground. The vibrant colors and unfamiliar scents of this new world assaulted his senses. The air was thick with the sweet aroma of sugarcane and the earthy scent of tobacco, mingling with a pungent odor of fish and salt from the nearby docks. In the bustling port town, Crusoe's eyes were drawn to the lush plantations that stretched as far as he could see. Fields of green swayed in the breeze, promising wealth and opportunity. He found himself drawn into conversations with local planters, their words painting pictures of prosperity that set his mind racing with possibilities. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, Crusoe made the decision to try his hand at planting. He sold his boat, the very vessel that had carried him to freedom, feeling a pang of loss as he watched it sail away without him. The hardest part was parting ways with Xury. The boy's eyes, filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding, haunted Crusoe as he watched him leave. Using the money from these sales, Crusoe purchased a plot of land. It wasn't much, but it was his. He stood at the edge of his property, the rich soil crumbling between his fingers, and felt a surge of determination. The scent of possibility hung in the air, as tangible as the humidity that clung to his skin. The next 4 years passed in a blur of backbreaking work and steep learning curves. Crusoe's hands, once soft from his genteel upbringing, grew calloused and strong. He learned the rhythms of the land, the delicate balance of sun and rain needed to coax life from the earth. Each blister, each aching muscle, was a badge of honor in his quest for success. His plantation flourished under his care, like a child growing strong and tall. The sugar cane swayed in the breeze, a sea of green promise. Tobacco leaves, broad and fragrant, dried in the sun. With each passing season, Crusoe's wealth grew, and he found himself respected among the other planters. The sweet taste of success was intoxicating, filling him with a sense of accomplishment he had never known before. Yet, even as he reveled in his success, a familiar restlessness began to stir in his heart. It was like an itch he couldn't scratch, a whisper in the back of his mind that grew louder with each passing day. The comfort of his new life, once so satisfying, now felt like a cage. The very fields that had once represented freedom now seemed to hem him in, the endless rows of crops a reminder of the monotony of his days. Crusoe found himself gazing out to sea more often, his mind wandering to distant shores and untold adventures. The stories of other planters, tales of fortunes made and lost in far-off lands, set his blood racing. He would stand at the edge of his property, the warm Brazilian breeze ruffling his hair, and feel the pull of the unknown tugging at his soul. It was during one such gathering, the air heavy with cigar smoke and the rich aroma of Brazilian coffee, that an opportunity presented itself. A group of fellow planters, their eyes gleaming with the promise of wealth, proposed a slave-trading expedition to Africa. The words hung in the air, charged with potential and danger. Crusoe's heart raced at the prospect. The potential for profit was enormous, far beyond what his plantation could yield in years. Yet, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered caution, reminding him of the perils he had so narrowly escaped. The memory of his own desperate flight from slavery made his stomach churn with guilt and uncertainty. But the lure of adventure, the siren song of greater riches, proved too strong to resist. Crusoe, his mind filled with visions of multiplying his fortune, agreed to join the expedition. As he shook hands with his fellow planters, sealing his commitment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was setting in motion events that would change the course of his life once again. Little did Crusoe know, as he began preparations for the journey, that his decision, driven by greed and a thirst for more, would indeed dramatically alter his fate in ways he could never have imagined. As he stood on the deck of the ship that would carry him back to Africa, a sense of unease settled over him like a heavy cloak. The sky darkened to an ominous gray, casting long shadows across the deck. A chill wind whipped through the rigging, carrying with it the acrid scent of ozone. Crusoe shivered, suddenly aware of the vast, unpredictable ocean stretching out before him. What storms, what trials lay ahead? As the first drops of rain began to fall, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The sky darkened to an ominous gray, casting long shadows across the deck. A chill wind whipped through the rigging, carrying with it the acrid scent of ozone. Crusoe's stomach churned, mirroring the increasingly turbulent sea beneath them. Without warning, The storm unleashed its full fury. Wind howled like a ravenous beast, tearing at the sails and threatening to rip them from their masts. Waves, tall as mountains and frothing with rage, crashed against the hull. The ship groaned under the assault, timbers creaking in protest. Crusoe's world narrowed to a pinpoint of survival. His hands, raw and bleeding, clung desperately to the ship's railing. Salt spray stung his eyes, blurring his vision. Through the haze, he watched in horror as his fellow crew members, men he'd shared meals and laughter with, were swept overboard by the merciless sea. "Hold on," he screamed, his voice lost in the tempest's roar. But it was futile. One by one, they disappeared into the churning abyss. A sickening crack split the air. The mainmast splintered, toppling like a felled tree. Crusoe's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear. This was it. This was how he would die. But fate had other plans. A monstrous wave struck the ship broadside. Crusoe felt himself lifted, weightless for a terrifying moment, before being hurled into the sea. The icy water shocked his system. He flailed, fighting against the current that sought to drag him under. His lungs burned, screaming for air. Just as his strength began to fail, another wave caught him, tossing him like a rag doll onto a stretch of unknown shore. Consciousness returned slowly, creeping in like the tide. Crusoe blinked, squinting against the harsh sunlight. The taste of salt lingered on his lips, and his clothes clung to his body, heavy and sodden. As he pushed himself up on trembling arms, the full weight of his situation crashed down upon him. He was alone. Stranded. The sole survivor of a catastrophe that had claimed the lives of everyone he knew. Panic clawed at his throat, threatening to overwhelm him. But Crusoe forced it down, drawing on a well of inner strength he didn't know he possessed. He took stock of his surroundings, eyes scanning the coastline and the dense foliage beyond. The beach stretched out before him, a canvas of golden sand marred only by scattered debris from the shipwreck. Then, like a beacon of hope, he spotted it, the wreck of his ship, not far from shore. The sight ignited a spark of determination within him. If he could reach it, he might salvage supplies crucial for his survival. Over the next several days, Crusoe embarked on a series of perilous swims to and from the wreck. Each journey was a battle against the currents and his own exhaustion. The salt water stung his eyes and chafed his skin raw, but he pushed on, driven by the primal need to survive. His efforts bore fruit. With each trip, Crusoe managed to rescue vital supplies from the sinking vessel. Tools that would allow him to shape his environment, weapons to defend himself against unknown dangers, food to stave off hunger, and clothing to protect him from the elements. He even salvaged some money, though he couldn't help but laugh bitterly at its uselessness in his current predicament. As Crusoe stood on the beach, surrounded by his hard-won bounty, a mix of emotions washed over him. Relief at having secured these essential items mingled with a deep-seated fear of the unknown future that stretched out before him. Yet, there was also a flicker of pride in his chest. He'd survived against impossible odds, and these salvaged items represented more than just physical objects. They were the foundation of his new life on this island. With a deep breath, Crusoe squared his shoulders and turned his gaze inland. The real test of survival, he knew, was just beginning. But armed with his salvaged supplies and an indomitable will to live, he was ready to face whatever challenges this island might throw his way. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the beach, Crusoe felt a sudden urgency. He needed shelter, and he needed it soon. The thought of spending another night exposed to the elements sent a shiver down his spine. With renewed determination, he gathered what he could carry and set off towards the tree line. The dense foliage loomed before him, dark and forbidding. As Crusoe took his first steps into the unknown, a rustling sound stopped him in his tracks. Something was moving in the underbrush, something large. His heart raced as he realized that he might not be alone on this island after all. The relentless sun beat down on Crusoe's back as he dragged planks of wood and rolls of canvas across the scorching sand. Sweat trickled down his face, stinging his eyes and leaving salty trails on his sun-baked skin. The crash of waves against the shore provided a constant backdrop to his labors, a rhythmic reminder of his isolation. Shelter was his first priority. With calloused hands and aching muscles, Crusoe erected a makeshift tent using the ship's sails. The canvas billowed in the salty breeze as he secured it to wooden poles salvaged from the wreckage. It wasn't much, but as he crawled inside for the first time, the shade felt like a small miracle. The coolness enveloped him, offering a brief respite from the punishing heat. As days melted into weeks, Crusoe's initial shelter evolved. Like a determined ant building its hill, he worked tirelessly, his mind racing with plans for survival in this unfamiliar wilderness. The tent gradually transformed into a more permanent structure, which he affectionately dubbed his castle. It wasn't grand by any means, but it was his, a testament to his resilience and ingenuity. Paranoia crept in as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, casting long shadows across his little kingdom. Crusoe imagined unseen threats lurking in the island's depths. To ease his fears, he constructed a sturdy fence around his castle, each post driven deep into the earth like sentinels standing guard. The physical barrier provided a sense of security, however illusory it might be. The lack of human contact began to gnaw at Crusoe's psyche. The silence was deafening, broken only by the calls of unfamiliar birds and the rustle of wind through palm fronds. To combat the creeping madness of timelessness, he devised a rudimentary calendar system. With painstaking care, Crusoe erected a large wooden cross near his dwelling. Each day, he would carve a small notch into its surface, a tangible mark of time's passage. The simple act became a ritual, grounding him in reality and providing a semblance of structure to his otherwise chaotic existence. The notches multiplied like tally marks counting down an indefinite sentence. Yet for Crusoe, they were more than just scratches on wood. They were a lifeline to sanity, a way to measure his progress and remind himself that he was still alive, still fighting. As darkness fell, Crusoe would retreat to his castle. There, by the flickering light of a makeshift candle, he poured his thoughts onto the pages of a journal salvaged from the ship. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the scratching of his quill filled the silence. The journal became both a practical log and an emotional outlet. Crusoe meticulously recorded his daily activities, the crops he planted, the tools he fashioned, the small victories and frustrating setbacks. But between the lines of practical observations, his deeper feelings seeped through like water through cracks in stone. He wrote of his fears, the paralyzing terror of never being rescued, of dying alone on this godforsaken island. His hand trembled as he chronicled his hopes, vivid fantasies of ships appearing on the horizon, of returning to civilization. And he documented his gradual adaptation to island life, surprised by his own resilience and resourcefulness. The act of writing became therapeutic, a way to process his tumultuous emotions and maintain a tenuous grip on his identity. As he filled page after page, Crusoe felt less like a castaway and more like the author of his own story, however uncertain its ending might be. In the face of overwhelming solitude, these simple practices, the notched cross and the well-worn journal, became Crusoe's anchors. They helped him maintain a sense of order and purpose, small flames of hope flickering in the vast darkness of his isolation. As he closed his journal each night and drifted off to sleep, Crusoe clung to these routines, knowing they were crucial to his survival, not just of his body, but of his very soul. As the days turned to weeks and then to months, Crusoe found himself changing. The soft-handed merchant's son was fading away, replaced by a man hardened by the unforgiving island. His once smooth palms were now calloused, his skin bronzed by the relentless sun. He moved with a new purpose, each action deliberate and efficient. One morning, as Crusoe carved another notch into his wooden cross, he caught his reflection in a pool of rainwater. The face staring back at him was almost unrecognizable, weathered, bearded, with eyes that held a wild, determined glint. He realized with a start that he was no longer just surviving, he was beginning to thrive. Time on the island transformed Robinson Crusoe. Once a helpless castaway, he evolved into a resourceful survivor, honing his skills to thrive in his isolated world. The relentless tropical sun beat down on Crusoe's tanned skin as he ventured out to explore his new domain. Each step crunched beneath his makeshift sandals, sending tiny lizards scurrying for cover. The air hung heavy with the scent of salt and exotic blooms, a constant reminder of his isolation. As he crested a hill, the island unfurled before him like a vibrant tapestry. Lush forests gave way to jagged cliffs, their faces etched by centuries of wind and waves. Hidden coves winked invitingly from the coastline, promising shelter and perhaps untapped resources. Crusoe's heart raced, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through his veins. He was both master and prisoner of this wild paradise. One sweltering afternoon, the jungle's humid silence shattered. A rustle in the undergrowth sent Crusoe's pulse skyrocketing. There, bathed in dappled sunlight, stood a wild goat. Its coat gleamed like polished silver, its eyes wary but unafraid. Crusoe's hands trembled as he raised his crude spear. The moment stretched like warm toffee, the only sound his own ragged breathing. Then, with a prayer on his lips, he struck. The goat fell, and with it, a piece of Crusoe's old self. Triumph surged through him, quickly chased by a pang of remorse. This was survival in its rawest form, kill or starve. As he knelt beside his prize, the iron tang of blood mixing with the earthy scent of crushed foliage, Crusoe knew he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer just existing on the island, he was learning to live. The taste of fresh meat after weeks of meager foraging was nothing short of divine. It awakened something primal in Crusoe, a hunger not just for food, but for mastery over his environment. If there was one goat, logic dictated there must be more. Days blurred into weeks as he observed, planned, and executed increasingly sophisticated traps. His persistence paid off. Soon, a small herd of captured goats bleated in a rudimentary pen, their complaints a sweet melody to Crusoe's ears. This living larder promised not just sustenance, but a future. With each milking, each successful breeding, Crusoe felt his grip on survival strengthen. Yet food was only the beginning. The seeds salvaged from the shipwreck burned in Crusoe's palm like tiny embers of hope. His first attempts at agriculture were humbling disasters. Seedlings wilted under the merciless sun, and unfamiliar insects devoured tender shoots overnight. But Crusoe's stubborn streak, once a liability in civilized society, now became his greatest asset. He studied the island's rhythms like a man possessed. The patterns of rain and drought, the subtle shifts in wind direction, all became entries in his mental almanac. Each failure taught him, molding him into something more than a castaway. He was becoming a student of the land itself. The day the first green shoots of barley poked through the soil, Crusoe wept. He fell to his knees, calloused fingers gently caressing the fragile stems. It was more than just plants growing, it was hope taking root. As his crops flourished, so did his spirit. Soon, patches of barley and rice swayed in the sea breeze, a golden testament to his determination and ingenuity. Life settled into a rhythm as predictable and comforting as the tides. Mornings found Crusoe tending to his goats and crops, the repetitive tasks a balm to his once chaotic mind. Afternoons were devoted to improving his living conditions, each small upgrade a victory against the wilderness that had once threatened to swallow him whole. Crusoe's hands, once soft and unsuited for manual labor, became instruments of creation. Crude furniture took shape under his patient touch, transforming his shelter from a mere refuge to something resembling a home. He whittled utensils from island timber, each spoon and fork a small step back toward civilization. His attempts at pottery provided both frustration and unexpected joy. The first misshapen bowls made him laugh out loud, the sound startling in the usual quiet of his camp. Even these failures felt like progress. Each lopsided pot was a reminder that he was more than just a survivor, he was becoming a creator, a builder of his own tiny world. As seasons turned, Crusoe's thoughts turned to the future. The abundance of summer needed to carry him through leaner times. The pungent smell of smoke and salt became a constant companion as he experimented with preserving meat. Strips of goat flesh hung like bizarre fruit from makeshift racks, slowly curing in the island breeze. The sight filled Crusoe with a fierce pride. He was no longer at the mercy of fate, he was actively shaping his destiny. With each new skill mastered, the crushing weight of isolation eased. Loneliness gave way to a quiet satisfaction in his accomplishments. The island, once a prison, had become a canvas for his ingenuity. As he sat by his fire each evening, surrounded by the fruits of his labor, Crusoe realized a profound truth. He had not just survived, he had found a way to truly live. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his carefully tended domain, an unfamiliar sensation prickled at the back of Crusoe's neck. The hairs on his arms stood on end, and a shiver ran down his spine despite the lingering heat. Something felt different, off, as if the very air around him held its breath in anticipation. Crusoe scanned the darkening landscape, his eyes straining against the gathering gloom. For the first time in years, he felt watched, observed. His paradise suddenly seemed less secure, less known. As night fell, Crusoe retreated to his shelter, unable to shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was about to change forever. Robinson Crusoe's world was about to be turned upside down. After years of solitary existence on the island, an unexpected discovery would shatter his peaceful routine. The sun beat down mercilessly as Crusoe trudged along the shoreline, his feet sinking into the warm sand with each step. The rhythmic crash of waves against the beach had long been his only companion, a soothing melody that usually calmed his restless mind. But today, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unseen energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. As he rounded a familiar bend, his eyes fell upon something that made his heart skip a beat. There, etched clearly in the damp sand, was a single human footprint. Crusoe froze, his breath catching in his throat. The footprint was unmistakable, its outline crisp and fresh as if it had just been made. It was much larger than his own, a stark reminder of the outside world he had long forgotten. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The constant murmur of the waves faded into the background as Crusoe's mind reeled, struggling to process what he was seeing. Hope, like a fragile butterfly, fluttered in his chest. Could this mean rescue? An end to his lonely exile? But just as quickly, terror gripped him, squeezing the air from his lungs. What if the footprint belonged to a savage, a cannibal, or worse? Crusoe's heart pounded like a drum, each beat echoing in his ears. He knelt beside the footprint, his trembling fingers hovering just above the sand. Part of him wanted to believe it was his own, a trick of the mind born from years of isolation. But as he placed his foot beside the mysterious imprint, the stark difference in size crushed that feeble hope. Panic seized him, turning his blood to ice. The island, once his sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig became a potential threat. Crusoe's eyes darted wildly, scanning the tree-line for any sign of movement. The lush greenery that had once been a source of comfort now seemed to hide countless dangers. With his heart in his throat, he fled back to his fortified home. The journey, once so familiar, now felt like a gauntlet of unseen dangers. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified by his fear. Sweat beaded on his brow, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he finally reached his shelter. Crusoe barricaded himself inside, his hands shaking as he piled furniture against the door. The rough wood scraped against his palms, but he barely noticed the pain. For 3 long days, he remained there, a prisoner of his own fear. The silence that had once been his constant companion now seemed oppressive, filled with imagined whispers and footsteps. Sleep eluded him, his dreams plagued by shadowy figures with menacing grins. When he finally ventured out, the world seemed changed. The island, once a paradise of solitude, now felt like a sinister maze. Crusoe moved with the caution of a hunted animal, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. The weight of his weapons, once a comfort, now felt like a grim necessity. The cool metal of his musket pressed against his palm, a constant reminder of the potential danger lurking around every corner. He began to fortify his shelter with a frenzied urgency, as if building a castle against an impending siege. New barriers rose, hidden caches were created, each addition a bulwark against his growing fear. His daily routines, once a source of comfort and structure, were now carefully planned to minimize exposure. Every trip for food or water became a tactical operation, his senses on high alert for any sign of intrusion. Days blended into a blur as Crusoe scoured the island for any other signs of human presence. Every beach, every clearing, every hidden glen was examined with painstaking care. The soft sand yielded no more footprints, the dense foliage revealed no paths. But the island yielded no more clues, no answers to the questions that tormented him. The mysterious footprint had become a specter that haunted his every waking moment. It was a stark reminder that his perceived solitude might be an illusion, that at any moment his world could change forever. This single mark in the sand had shattered his sense of security, forcing him to confront the possibility of human contact after years of isolation. As night fell on another day of fruitless searching, Crusoe stood on the beach where he had first seen the footprint. The waves lapped at the shore, erasing all traces of the day's passage. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a beautiful sight that once would have filled him with peace. Now, it only served as a reminder of another day gone by without answers. He realized that this event marked a turning point in his island life. The comfortable routine of his existence had been irreversibly disrupted, replaced by a new reality tinged with both fear and anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, Crusoe knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As he turned to head back to his shelter, a flicker of movement caught his eye. There, at the edge of the tree-line, a shadow seemed to shift. Crusoe's heart leapt into his throat. Was it merely the wind playing tricks with the leaves, or was he about to come face to face with the owner of that mysterious footprint? Robinson Crusoe's life of solitude was about to be shattered. After years alone on his island, a dramatic event would forever alter his isolated existence. The sun beat down mercilessly on Crusoe's sun-weathered skin as he crouched behind a cluster of rocks, his heart pounding in his chest. The salty breeze carried the acrid scent of smoke and something far more sinister. His eyes, sharp from years of survival, fixed on a group of dark figures moving like predators along the golden shoreline. Cannibals. The word sent a chill down his spine despite the tropical heat. Their guttural chants mixed with the rhythmic crash of waves, creating a haunting melody of impending doom. Among their captives, one man stood out. His eyes blazed with a fierce determination that resonated with Crusoe's own will to survive. In a blur of sand and desperation, the captive broke free. He ran with the frantic energy of prey, each footfall kicking up a spray of sand. Without thinking, Crusoe felt his body move. Years of isolation melted away as a surge of courage propelled him forward. The weight of his firearms felt reassuring in his calloused hands. As he emerged from his hiding spot, the pursuing cannibals froze. Their eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and primal fear etched on their faces. Crusoe raised his gun, its metal gleaming like a beacon of hope in the tropical sun. The crack of the shot shattered the air, sending birds scattering from nearby palms in a flurry of panicked wings. The cannibals recoiled as if struck, their faces masks of terror at this unknown power. They scrambled away, leaving their intended victim trembling but alive on the sand. The rescued man fell to his knees, chest heaving. His eyes met Crusoe's, brimming with a gratitude that transcended language. In that moment, a bond formed between them, as tangible as the grains of sand beneath their feet. "Friday," Crusoe said, his voice hoarse from disuse. He pointed to himself, then to the man. "I'll call you Friday." A tentative smile played on Friday's lips as he nodded, accepting this new identity. In the days that followed, Crusoe embraced his role as teacher with unexpected enthusiasm. He started with simple words, pointing to the world around them. "Water," he'd say, gesturing to the crystal-clear streams that snaked through the lush island vegetation. "Fire," he'd explain, as they huddled by the warmth of evening flames, the crackling would a comforting soundtrack to their lessons. Friday's mind was like a sponge, soaking up every new piece of information with an eagerness that both impressed and touched Crusoe. As Friday's vocabulary grew, so did the depth of their conversations and the strength of their bond. Crusoe found himself sharing not just language, but the intricacies of his European heritage. He demonstrated the art of building sturdy shelters, the techniques of coaxing life from the island's fertile soil, and the skills of hunting with more than just primitive weapons. With each lesson, Friday's eyes would light up with a curiosity that reminded Crusoe of his own long-forgotten wonder at the world. Perhaps the most significant change came when Crusoe introduced Friday to the concepts of Christianity. At first, Friday struggled to grasp the abstract ideas of an unseen God, his brow furrowing in concentration. But Crusoe's patience and conviction slowly began to take root in Friday's heart. Their discussions about faith often stretched long into the night, the stars above twinkling like silent witnesses to this cultural exchange. As the seasons changed, marked by subtle shifts in the island's flora, Friday transformed from a rescued stranger to an indispensable companion. His presence breathed new life into Crusoe's daily routines. Together, they tended to the crops, their laughter echoing across the fields as they worked side by side. They hunted as a team, Friday's keen eyesight complementing Crusoe's marksmanship. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, sharing stories of their vastly different lives. Friday's tales of his homeland painted vivid pictures in Crusoe's mind, expanding his world beyond the confines of the island. In return, Crusoe's accounts of bustling cities and seafaring adventures filled Friday with wonder, his eyes wide as he tried to imagine worlds so different from his own. The island, once a prison of solitude for Crusoe, now felt like a shared kingdom. Every tree, every hill, every hidden cove became a place of joint discovery and shared memories. The loneliness that had once threatened to consume Crusoe ebbed away, replaced by a deep sense of companionship and purpose. As time passed, the distinction between master and servant blurred. Friday's loyalty and cheerful nature endeared him to Crusoe in ways he had never expected. Their relationship deepened into a friendship that transcended cultural barriers, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. In quiet moments, Crusoe would marvel at how this twist of fate had so profoundly changed his life. The man he had saved had, in turn, saved him from the crushing weight of isolation. Friday's presence brought new energy and perspective to the island, transforming it from a place of exile into a home filled with warmth and shared experiences. This human connection marked a significant turning point in Crusoe's journey, alleviating his loneliness and changing the dynamic of his island existence. As they sat together, watching another breathtaking island sunset, the sky ablaze with oranges and purples, Crusoe realized that in saving Friday, he had found something he didn't know he was missing, a true friend and a renewed sense of purpose in his castaway life. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their island paradise, a nagging worry gnawed at the edges of Crusoe's contentment. The memory of the cannibals' visit lingered like a dark cloud. Would they return? And if they did, could this fragile peace he and Friday had built withstand the storm that would surely follow? Crusoe and Friday had found peace on their island sanctuary. However, their tranquil life was not without its challenges, as they faced periodic disruptions from unwelcome cannibal groups returning to their shores. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the beach. The air was thick with humidity, clinging to their skin like a damp cloth. Crusoe's eyes scanned the horizon, a habit born from years of vigilance. Beside him, Friday crouched, his muscles tense, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The sound of approaching canoes broke the rhythmic lapping of waves against the shore. Crusoe's heart began to race, his palms growing slick with sweat. They retreated to the safety of the dense foliage, their movements silent and practiced. From their hiding spot, they watched as a group of cannibals made landfall. The scene unfolding before them was like a waking nightmare. Two prisoners, their faces etched with terror, lay bound on the sand. The cannibals moved around them with a chilling efficiency that made Crusoe's stomach churn. "Friday," Crusoe whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle rustle of leaves, "we cannot stand idly by." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. They had discussed this possibility many times, but the reality of it was far more horrifying than they could have imagined. Crusoe's hand trembled as he checked his firearm. The weight of it felt both reassuring and terrifying. He had never taken a human life before, but in this moment, he knew he must act or bear the guilt of inaction forever. On my signal, Crusoe breathed, his eyes never leaving the gruesome scene before them. They burst from their hiding place, their sudden appearance like avenging angels descending upon the beach. The crack of gunfire split the air, sending birds scattering from nearby trees in a flurry of feathers and alarmed cries. Chaos erupted on the sand, the cannibals scattering like startled deer, their feet kicking up clouds of fine white sand. In the confusion, Crusoe and Friday made their way to the prisoners. The first, a man with the weathered face of a sailor, looked up at them with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. But it was the second prisoner that caused Friday to let out a cry of pure joy. "Father," he exclaimed, falling to his knees beside the older man. Crusoe watched as Friday embraced his father, tears streaming down both their faces. The reunion was like a balm to his soul, a reminder of the goodness that could exist even in the darkest of times. The sound of their joyful sobs mingled with the gentle lapping of waves, creating a bittersweet melody. As the dust settled and the last of the cannibals disappeared into the jungle, leaving behind only footprints in the sand, Crusoe turned his attention to the sailor. The man introduced himself as a Spaniard, his voice hoarse with emotion as he thanked them for their timely intervention. In the days that followed, their small community grew closer. The island, once a vast and lonely place, now felt alive with the sound of voices and laughter. Friday and his father spent long hours in conversation, bridging the gap of their long separation. Their words flowed like a river, sometimes punctuated by tears, other times by laughter that echoed across the beach. The Spaniard, too, became an integral part of their group. His stories of adventure and of other Europeans stranded on the mainland painted vivid pictures in Crusoe's mind. Each tale was like a window to the world beyond their island, a world Crusoe had almost forgotten. As Crusoe listened to these tales, a spark of hope ignited in his chest. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the confines of the island. He began to formulate plans, discussing with the Spaniard the possibility of rescuing the other Europeans. The island, once a prison, now felt like the first step on a journey. As Crusoe looked out over the endless expanse of ocean, he felt a sense of anticipation building within him. The future, once so bleak and unchanging, now held the promise of new adventures and perhaps a return to the world he had left behind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Crusoe's eyes caught something on the distant horizon. His heart skipped a beat as he squinted, trying to make out the shape. Could it be? After all these years? The silhouette grew clearer with each passing moment, and Crusoe felt a surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. There, against the backdrop of the setting sun, was the unmistakable outline of a ship. An English ship. Crusoe's heart leapt at the sight of an English ship on the horizon. After years of isolation, his long-awaited opportunity for rescue had finally arrived. The salty breeze carried with it a surge of hope, tinged with an undercurrent of anxiety that rippled through his weathered frame. As the vessel drew closer, Crusoe's initial elation morphed into a gnawing unease. Something was amiss. The ship's approach was erratic, its sails billowing chaotically in the wind. Through his spyglass, he observed heated arguments erupting on deck, fists flying and bodies grappling. His dreams of a smooth rescue began to crumble like sand castles in the tide. A small boat was lowered, cutting through the choppy waves towards the shore. Crusoe's instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed at him to remain hidden. From his vantage point among the rocks, he watched as 3 men were roughly shoved onto the beach. The captain and 2 loyal crew members, now prisoners of what Crusoe realized was a full-blown mutiny. The gravity of the situation settled on Crusoe like a lead weight. Here was his chance for salvation, wrapped in a thorny package of danger and moral dilemma. The raucous laughter of the mutineers echoed across the beach, a jarring sound that shattered the island's usual tranquility. Crusoe's mind raced, weighing his options. Could he stand by and watch these men suffer? Or should he risk everything he'd painstakingly built over nearly 3 decades to intervene? With determination etched on his sun-leathered face, Crusoe turned to Friday, his faithful companion. "Friday," he whispered, his voice hoarse with anticipation, "we have a fight on our hands." Together, they formulated a plan that would utilize every bit of knowledge they'd gained about the island. The terrain that had once been Crusoe's prison would now become his greatest ally. Every tree, every rock, every hidden path would play a part in their daring rescue attempt. Under the cover of darkness, Crusoe and Friday moved like shadows through the familiar landscape. The island seemed to conspire with them, every rustling leaf and shifting pebble masking their approach. As they neared the mutineers' camp, the acrid smell of rum and the sound of drunken singing filled the air, a cacophony of debauchery that set Crusoe's teeth on edge. With hearts pounding like war drums, they launched their attack. Crusoe's years of solitude had honed his senses to a razor's edge, and Friday's natural agility made him a formidable force. They struck with the fury of a sudden tropical storm, catching the mutineers off guard. The battle was fierce but brief. Swords clashed with a metallic ring that pierced the night air. Pistols barked, their muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the chaos. Some mutineers fell, others surrendered, their rebellion crushed by the unexpected assault. As the dust settled, Crusoe stood victorious alongside the freed captain, both men panting and bloodied but alive. Gratitude shone in the captain's eyes as he grasped Crusoe's hand. "You've saved us all," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." Crusoe's reply was simple: "Take me home." As preparations for departure began, a whirlwind of emotions swept through Crusoe. The island that had been his prison, his home, his entire world for 28 years, would soon be nothing but a memory. He felt like a tree being uprooted, his very essence intertwined with the soil and rocks of this place. In the days before their departure, Crusoe took the captain on a tour of his domain. He showed him the cave that had sheltered him, the fields he had cultivated, and the goats he had domesticated. Each sight, each explanation, was tinged with a bittersweet nostalgia. "It's remarkable," the captain marveled, "how you've carved out a life here." Crusoe nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "It wasn't always easy," he admitted, "but it became home." As they prepared to leave, Crusoe's thoughts turned to the mutineers who had chosen to remain on the island. Despite their actions, he couldn't bring himself to abandon them without guidance. He spent hours writing detailed instructions on survival, sharing the hard-earned wisdom of his years. Standing on the beach, ready to board the ship that would carry him back to civilization, Crusoe took one last look at the island. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, as if the island itself was bidding him a colorful farewell. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore seemed to whisper goodbye, a sound that had been the backdrop to his life for so long. With a deep breath, he turned to the waiting boat. It was time to leave, to return to the world he had left behind so long ago. As he stepped into the craft, Crusoe felt the weight of his experiences, the strength he had gained, and the man he had become. The island had shaped him, challenged him, and ultimately, saved him. As the ship set sail, Crusoe stood at the rail, watching his island home fade into the distance. The salty spray on his face mingled with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. The vastness of the ocean stretched before him, a blank canvas of possibility and uncertainty. But as the familiar shoreline disappeared over the horizon, a new anxiety began to gnaw at Crusoe's heart. What awaited him in England? How much had changed in his absence? Would he even recognize the world he was returning to? As the ship sailed on through the night, Crusoe's mind raced with questions, his excitement for home tempered by a growing sense of trepidation about what lay ahead. Crusoe's feet touched English soil on June 11, 1687, marking the end of his long and perilous voyage. It had been 35 years since he had last seen his homeland, a lifetime of adventure and hardship etched into his weathered face. The familiar sense of his native land washed over him like a tide, carrying with it a rush of long-buried memories. The tang of coal smoke, the earthy aroma of rain-soaked cobblestones, and the faint whisper of sea salt in the air, all of it both strange and achingly familiar. As Crusoe's boots clicked against the worn stones of London's bustling streets, he felt like a ghost walking through a half-remembered dream. The city had transformed in his absence, growing and evolving like a living organism. Towering buildings cast long shadows where once stood modest dwellings, and the cacophony of voices, hooves, and cartwheels created a symphony of progress that both thrilled and unsettled him. Crusoe's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as he navigated this new landscape, searching for remnants of the world he once knew. With each step, the weight of uncertainty pressed down upon him. What had become of his affairs? Would he find himself a pauper in this strange new world? The questions swirled in his mind like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Taking a deep breath, Crusoe steeled himself and sought out news of his financial state. The revelation that greeted him was nothing short of miraculous. Far from destitution, Crusoe found himself a man of considerable wealth. His Brazilian plantations, entrusted years ago to a kind-hearted captain, had flourished beyond his wildest dreams. The news hit him like a gust of wind, lifting the burden of worry from his shoulders and replacing it with a dizzying sense of possibility. Yet, amidst this newfound joy, a shadow fell across Crusoe's heart. His search for familiar faces led him to a sobering truth. His parents had passed during his long absence. The news settled in his chest like a heavy stone, a bittersweet reminder of the price his adventures had exacted. Crusoe found himself standing at the crossroads of elation and grief, the conflicting emotions threatening to tear him apart. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a sense of duty, Crusoe embarked on a journey to Lisbon. The Portuguese city, with its sun-drenched streets and the ever-present smell of salt in the air, held the key to his newfound fortune. As he walked along the bustling docks, the sound of creaking ships and shouting sailors transported him back to his days at sea. Fate, it seemed, had one more surprise in store for Crusoe. There, amidst the crowd, he spotted a familiar face, the Portuguese captain who had rescued him from the shores of Africa so many years ago. Their reunion was like finding a long-lost brother, filled with warm embraces and heartfelt gratitude. As they shared stories of the years that had passed, Crusoe felt a piece of his old life slot back into place. With his affairs in order and his conscience clear, Crusoe returned to England, ready to embrace the life that awaited him. He opened his heart to love, marrying and starting a family. The pitter-patter of little feet soon filled his home as 3 children brought new joy and purpose to his life. For a time, Crusoe reveled in the simple pleasures of domesticity, the warmth of his wife's smile, the laughter of his children, the comfort of a life well lived. Yet, beneath the veneer of domestic bliss, the call of adventure still whispered in Crusoe's ear. It was a siren song he could not ignore, growing louder with each passing year. When his beloved wife passed away, the last tether holding him to this settled life snapped. The familiar ache of wanderlust returned, as insistent as a heartbeat. Unable to resist the pull of his past, Crusoe set sail once more, his heart set on revisiting the island that had been both his prison and his kingdom. The journey was like traveling back in time, each nautical mile bringing him closer to the man he once was. The salt spray on his face and the endless horizon before him awakened something long dormant in his soul. As the familiar shoreline came into view, Crusoe's heart raced with anticipation. The island, once a place of solitude and struggle, had transformed. Where there was once emptiness, now stood a thriving community of Spanish and English settlers. The sight filled him with a mix of pride and nostalgia, seeing his once lonely domain now teeming with life and possibility. For a month, Crusoe immersed himself in the life of the colony, sharing his knowledge and marveling at what human determination could achieve. He walked the beaches where he had once despaired, now lined with boats and bustling with activity. He climbed the hills where he had kept his solitary watch, now dotted with homes and gardens. The experience rekindled a fire within him, a thirst for exploration and new experiences that had never truly been quenched. As he bid farewell to the island once more, Crusoe knew in his heart that this was not the end of his journey. The horizon beckoned, promising new adventures and untold stories waiting to be discovered. With a smile on his face and the wind in his hair, Crusoe set his sights on the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The world was vast and full of wonders, and he was determined to embrace every moment of it. Standing on the deck of the ship as it pulled away from the island, Crusoe felt a sense of completion. He had come full circle, from a young man seeking fortune to a seasoned adventurer who had found wealth beyond measure, not just in gold, but in experiences, in friendships, and in the wisdom that only a life fully lived could bring. As the island faded into the distance, becoming nothing more than a speck on the horizon, Crusoe turned his gaze forward. The sea stretched out before him, a canvas of endless blue, full of promise and possibility. He didn't know where the winds would take him next, but he was ready for whatever lay ahead. For Crusoe, the greatest adventure was not behind him, but always just over the next wave, waiting to be discovered.